Hi everyone to another episode of Next Stuff. Pleased to welcome today's guest, Mark Duman, who acts as a patient advocate, but on the same time is a rare blend of clinician, management consultant, and as I already said, patient. Mark, how are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm enjoying the sunshine in Manchester in the north of England, which very rarely happens. So I'm amazed there's a golden orb in the sky.
Fantastic. Here it's also quite sunny, which is also very unusual for January, but we won't complain, right? So I really have to admit that we as industry, so pharma, is still very uncomfortable to speak and interview patients, right? And maybe we can start with a question: why is that the case?
Well, I think we often hide behind compliance and the code, and I think patients are absolutely key. We're not in tobacco, we're not in armaments. We're actually a care industry. We're developing medicines and indeed medical technologies, and of course digital health that prolongs quantity of life and improves quality of life. So it's all about care. Sometimes I think we put profit and pipeline before the person and the patient. We get our P's mixed up. But I think it's absolutely key that in any industry, we understand our end users. We talk to the recipients of our products. Now, we have some legislative challenges in certain countries where we can't talk directly to patients, but we can talk to patients and we can learn from patients and our end users. I'm a pharmacist by profession, although no longer practice, but I'm slightly embarrassed that we have a 50% failure rate when it comes to the consumption of medicines as directed. I can't really think of any other global industry that has a 50% failure rate and goes on as if that's just acceptable normality. I mean, hello, if 50% of Wi-Fi or trains or planes didn't get to their destination, there'd be a public outcry, but we all seem to just hide the fact that people don't take medicines because it's too big a problem to fix or we're all too embarrassed about it. But, we really need to start engaging patients, understanding why they don't want to take our medicines and helping them to support taking the medicines, not just producing great medicines. What's the point of producing a great medicine that remains untaken?
Absolutely. Next question: with the new year and ahead of regulations and an ongoing transformation process, what is the role and importance of patients nowadays? And does anyone really care in pharma about patients?
So I think pharma is getting better. I think they do care, and we've said earlier, but we are in the care world. So I think they do care. I think the big question for me is, if I were to look at a pharmaceutical company, and I have done this, or indeed not just pharma, but life sciences more broadly, where's the chief patient officer? I have a chief medical officer, I have a commercial officer, I have a chief development officer, even chief digital officers. If the patient's important, where is the chief patient officer or that type of role? And again, many companies have set up a medic and said he or she is our chief medical officer. And again, that's quite close, but not close enough to necessarily being a patient. Seeing things through medical eyes or through drug development eyes is not the same as being a patient who has lived with a particular condition. So it's expressed in every company's value or vision statement. It's everywhere. First, we are the patients at the center of what we do. And they do lots of activities. My fundamental question would be, well, where is the ownership and the resource investment in your patient engagement? Have you got a budget line? Do you know what you're doing across every part of the business, in every brand, in every therapy area, in every country? You can tell me about pharmacovigilance, you can tell me about sales pipeline, you can tell me about government activities, you can tell me about payers and provider engagement. If you can't give me that same clarity of information around patients, then are you really putting patients first? Is it really important to me? So tell me what your spend is, tell me what the percentage of your overall global budget is on patient engagement, and measure the impact that you have. Don't just talk the talk, start walking the walk.
Absolutely, fully agree. Next question: if you would be the CEO of a big pharma firm, which actions would you take for better patient engagement?
So I don't think it needs to be big, and I don't think it needs to be pharma. I think it's any company in med tech, in medicines, in digital health. I think the first, so life sciences more broadly, I think the first thing I would be seeing is, what insight do you have? do you really understand the pathway, the journey, for lack of a better term, because often it's a nightmare, and I speak as a patient with type 2 diabetes. It's not a journey, it's a bloody horror story most of the time, you know. But have you done patient journey mapping? Have you, as the chief exec, gone out and walked through the pathways of the various oncology, immunology experiences that your patients and their carers are having? So I think it's really important that you go out once a year at minimum and experience what it's like across different countries, across different pathways of what your patients and their carers are going through. So that, to me, is insight is absolutely key. I think you need to then formalize that insight where across your very big sales force, in some cases, your relationships with healthcare professionals, whether it's at the R&D side or the commercial side, where are you collating that insight? As I mentioned earlier, pharma is very good at collating investigator insight because it's the life's blood of clinical trials. They're very good at collecting payer and prescriber insight because it's the lifeblood of the commercial side. But where are you collecting that patient insight, both directly but also mediated through healthcare professionals? Spend the same type or a similar type of money in investing that insight and experience and collating that, because you could make such a difference. We talk a lot, I think, about real world evidence, and patient generated data, and we'll come on, I think, to talk a little bit about that. But to me, fundamentally, put your money where your mouth is, which is a wonderful, I don't know if it's a Scottish phrase, but don't just tell me you're patient focused, show me you're patient focused, and pull together those insights that you already have across the company to make more person-centered medicines and to make the experience of taking those medicines and accessing services, again, more person-centered.
Absolutely. And in the end of the day, I would say it starts with a simple question, which is ask the patient, right? And we still don't get this out. So, okay, any particular firm which we can mention and from which we can currently learn how to incorporate proper patient engagement?
Well, I can talk. I'll wear my patient hat for a little bit, and then I'm not being seen to give any favoritism. So,
okay.
I am a member of Novo Nordisk, have something called DEEP, which is the Disease Expert Experience Panel, or the disease, I think it's that way around. And they have, I think, 120 of us across type 1, type 2, but also hemophilia and other therapy areas. And they come to us and they ask us questions and they say, we're thinking of developing this medicine. We're thinking of developing this device to help with the administration of our medicine. We're thinking of doing some work around changing diabetes from a prevention, from an interventional point of view that isn't just medicines, but is behavior change based. What do you think? So going back to your point about ask the patient, we can also ask patients to co-create solutions with us. There are many patients out there. There's a wonderful website based in Portugal called patient-innovation.com. And if you think about it, in our NHS in the UK, at least before COVID, every 18 hours, 1 million patients were touching our National Health Service. Now, if 1% of those patients, never mind 100%, but if 1% of those patients fed back insights on how the service could be improved, or their experience with a sort of positive outlook and said, these are things that we could do better, can you imagine the insight and the improvement that would drive? Let's do the same in pharma. Let's begin to really get that patient innovation and that patient insight in there. And as I've said, Novo are beginning to do that. I think, like all companies, there's always room for improvement and more to do. But I am beginning to see a shift in companies moving from it's a vision statement and it's something we talk about, to setting up patient academies, to looking at how health technology assessment can be influenced by patient preference, to looking very clearly at patient burden in clinical trials and trying to minimize that. I mean, just as a laugh, and this came through 2 days ago. They reached out to me as a type 2 patient. This was working on behalf of a CRO. And they said to me, would you be willing to do a 30-day inpatient hospital stay to try a new medicine? And I was like, are you mad? And they were like, no. And I said, you want me to take 30 days and go into a hospital for 30 days to help you develop a medicine? I said, who came up with this protocol? Are you nuts? And they said, well, would you do it? I say, well, if you paid me sufficient money that I could take a month off my work and off my family, then I might do it. But you're being driven by the protocol and the medicine and the clinical need, not by real life patient or person experience. So do me a favor, even asking a question about would you do 30 days sounds to me like it's mad. So I still think with the best will in the world, we're putting the molecule and the medicine before man.
Absolutely. Next question: what are the patient trends into which pharma will be forced to go into in the upcoming years?
Wow. Okay. So looking across an asset life cycle, as they like to call it, I think there's something we've touched on this. I think there's something about real world evidence, real world data, patient generated data. So, for example, I monitor my diabetes by looking at my steps and also doing a little bit of calorie counting. I use my phone. Can I take that information and would that be submittable in a clinical trial? Do I even need to be in a clinical trial? How about if my device is validated and the evidence and the data coming out of it is validated, is there a different way to approach clinical trials? Where do wearables come into that? So I think there's something for me that says, yes, we need to control the quality and quantity of data, but actually opening that up to every patient potentially being a trial participant because they've got a mobile phone. And again, we need to be careful about equality, diversity, inclusion in terms of the digital divide. But that puts a completely different focus and, dare I say, cannibalizes the sort of CRO market of having to control everything and charge huge amounts of money for running trials. I think with that comes a huge issue of trust. And I think we've got to be careful with data and whose data is it and how is it being managed, and sites taking people's data with permissions, but then strange things happening with that data and you being, I constantly, having bought something on Amazon, keep getting reminded on other websites, would you like to buy another one of these? And I'm thinking, did I sign up for that? Who's watching and why is it coming up here? Moving a little bit more to the medicines taking rather than the medicines making side of things, where are we with patient support programs? The point we raised earlier, we need to help support patients with health and digital literacy in order to support them to take medicines. We really need to support self-management. We need to not just develop patient support programs for high-cost medicines, but dare I say also for generics. When I take my metformin, were I to fail to take that in order to manage my diabetes, the complications of my diabetes will be incredibly expensive down the line. But no one pays for a metformin support program because it's not something that necessarily the NHS would pay for. So how do we think a little bit more equitably about patient support programs around medicines taking, given, as we've said, the huge failure rate of patients to take medicines? I think there's a big piece of work to be done around access to medicines. And I don't want to disguise marketing as patient access, but I do think we need to better inform patients and citizens as to what medicines are available or even not available. And as I spent some time in the States a couple of months ago, the huge complication of co-payments and insurance systems, it's really difficult to access stuff. And that's becoming more complicated. So it's not just about, have we gone through the trial? Have we got this great medicine? Has it made an impact? Well, it has, but if I can't access it, what's the point of it as well? And then the last thing I would say would be, I suppose, prevention. And again, this is an interesting conversation. Are pharmaceutical companies genuinely interested in preventing, in my case, type 2? Or do they want to sell the product? Or will they get me eventually because my pancreas is deteriorating over age? So there's a big question mark for me about what role societally and beyond that do pharmaceutical companies have in prevention. And I suppose one last thing that just comes to mind is I've worked with lots and lots of companies in Europe and increasingly in the US, but I'm also looking now at Latin America and Africa and thinking, it's very easy to work with patient groups in the developed world, but what about the developing world? And how do we make sure that their lack of patient groups and patient engagement doesn't increase the inequalities wide gap even more? So I would like to see pharmaceutical companies, even where they're not necessarily selling huge amounts of product or making the profit, still looking at equitable access and the development and support of patient groups in these underserved populations.
Makes perfect sense. With that said, I would like to thank you for joining our Next Stuff podcast. So thanks, Mark, and looking to some more pharma stuff. Take very good care.
Thank you.